Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and today we're actually talking about the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. But before we get into that, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, and leave us a comment. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you guys. So thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to this one does not take place in the 1980s, and you'll see why soon enough. It actually takes place on September 17th of 1973, when a group of kids visit an amusement park and see a Dungeons and Dragons ride. And as they go on the ride, an immortal known as the Dungeon Master creates a portal between Earth and a distant world where it's not technology that is the dominant force, but rather it is swords and sorcery that reigns supreme here. And so, a little boy named Bobbi becomes a barbarian. He's 8 years old when the Dungeon Master gives him his magic club. An African American girl named Diana becomes an acrobat. She's only 14 when the DM gives her a bow staff. Diana's brave, athletic, and outspoken. She also provides inspiration, guidance, and support for her friends in times of peril or worry. A spoiled boy named Eric becomes a cavalier. He's 15 when he receives his shield. On the surface, Eric's a big mouth coward, but Eric actually has a heroic core and frequently saves his friends from danger with his griffin shield. Despite his aloofness and several instances of selfishness, Eric shares the camaraderie of the group and occasionally steps to the forefront as a substitute leader. The athletic and confident Hank becomes a ranger. He's 15 when he receives his energy bow from the dungeon master. He's brave and noble, maintaining a focus and determination even when presented with grave danger. He's also a natural born leader. The nerdy Albert, aka Presto, becomes an actual magic user. He's 14 when the dungeon master gives him his magic hat. Friendly and fiercely loyal to all in the group, Presto fulfills the role of the well meaning magic user whose spells almost always fail or produce unintended results. And the red haired Sheila becomes a rogue. She's only 13 when the DM gives her a cloak of invisibility. Sheila regularly utilizes her cloak at great peril to herself for the benefit, the common goals of her group. But in our game, they weren't the only people on that ride. Some of the other folks on the ride that day include one of many men who go by the name John Redbridge. He becomes a monk specializing in unarmed strikes. Also, here is an Earthman named Gary Gygax, who becomes a bard. And while not everyone realizes this, it is possible for bard abilities to relate to a different art form, such as knitting, candle making, whittling, or perfumery, or, in the case of Gary Gygax, storytelling. Anyways, as soon as they've arrived on this planet, they get attacked by an immortal known as Tiamat, whose current avatar is a five-headed dragon. The dungeon master summoning them here to this realm of one of his rival immortals, and the weapons and gear he gives them willy-nilly at level 1 tells us quite a bit about how the dungeon master operates. Then another immortal being named Venger shows up and attacks the kids. Venger shoots at them, and Eric deflects the blast with his shield, and it is reflected, striking Tiamat. So Tiamat and Venger fight as equals as the Earthlings escape. Dungeon Master tells them all that he's their guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons, But John Redbridge can't help but wonder if Dungeon Master brought them here and dropped everyone into the lap of two evil, godlike beings, and that the pawns in this little chess game of his are mostly children. Anyways, he keeps his thoughts to himself, and everyone climbs up a mountain. And Hank the Ranger suggests that from a higher vantage point, they may be able to see some sort of portal or something that might take them home. A baby unicorn was running away from Venger and Tiamat, so Bobbi the Barbarian keeps it as a pet and names it Uni, and it climbs the mountain with them. When they get to the top, they can see off into the distance, and this land is strange. There are several floating bits of rock, the size and general shape as an upside down pyramid, so that the flat part is on top and it tapers down to a point on the bottom. The kids take turns yelling and listening to the echo of their voices. But when the last one does it, they hear Tiamat's roar. Tiamat then appears before them once again, questioning them. And it is at this point that we split the party. The adults enter a huge cave, which is the entrance of a dungeon. And in here, they fight Tiamat. John Redbridge yells to the kids, telling them to save themselves. Bobbi the Barbarian uses his magic club, and he knocks a massive rock over the ledge above, sealing the cave entrance. So the kids wander off on their own, heading north, and hoping to find a way home to families and friends who they are sure must be going out of their minds with worry. Which brings us to the main plot. The kids walk through a barren wasteland with two hot suns beating down on them. They reach a sign saying that the castle of Merlin is nearby. So they head that way in the hopes that the famous Merlin the Wizard can get them home. But then they find a second sign pointing the way that they came. And at first, they're confused. But Diana the acrobat tells everyone to look up. And there in the sky, sitting atop a cloud, is a castle. A glowing golden rope ladder is lowered, and the kids climb it, which is a terrifying thought. Climbing a rope ladder so high that it reaches into the clouds is not something I would do. The moat around the castle up here is not water. It's a hole in the cloud that they're walking on. Looking down through the hole at the ground far, far below, Eric says he doesn't feel like going skydiving. So Diana the acrobat decides this is her department, and she bravely pole vaults over the quote unquote moat, then lowers the drawbridge. They enter the castle and come face to face with Merlin, who is petting a white rabbit. Merlin says he can't send them home, but he can tell them where they're going. Then he tells them a story about the village of Helix and how it used to be plagued by wyverns before he cast a spell that banished them. Merlin tells Presto that if Presto were to stay here with him, then Merlin could take Presto on as an apprentice and teach him everything that he knows. So Presto decides to stay here forever and be Merlin's apprentice. And Merlin tells Presto to stir something that Merlin's making in a huge cauldron. Then Merlin leaves for a while. And Presto almost immediately abandons his assigned duties to read a huge spell book that Merlin had nearby. In it, Presto finds a spell that he thinks could take he and his friends home. So he gathers some spell components, then casts this spell. But as always, Presto is tampering with forces beyond his ken. So the smoke that arises solidifies and forms several scaly brown wyverns. They bust through the wall and fly off to wreak havoc. So Presto runs to Merlin, admitting what he did and asking for help. But this was never the real Merlin. It was Venger in disguise. Meanwhile, the wyverns attack Helix, where the other kids have gone. The mayor of Helix is short and fat with a long red beard. He yells at everyone to clear the town square and evacuate the village. The kids grab some horses and ride off looking for Presto. Meanwhile, the other party of adventurers, the adults, walk into Helix looking for the kids, and they see the wyverns. And I know we've mentioned this in previous videos, but the John Redbridge character can bench press precisely 56 quadrillion, 294 trillion, 995 billion, 342 million, 131,200 pounds. So he makes extremely short work of these wyverns, which angers Venger. So Venger casts a spell which banishes that piece of ex-kryptonite shrapnel that Redbridge has in his body. And after enough time has passed, Redbridge loses all of his superpowers except for unaging, which he got from passing through the mists that surround Themyscira. And from then on out, Redbridge and Gary Gygax have to go adventuring the hard way. And since we ran this using 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons rules, the challenge rating system means that Redbridge doesn't even earn any experience points at all for anything he's done thus far, since the ex-kryptonite gave him an unfair advantage. Anyways, so let's skip forward to the epilogue. We ran years worth of games about both of these adventuring parties in the D&D world. With the kids, we followed the show's storylines as closely as possible. And I'll be honest, most of the guys who ran those games would railroad the players so that the outcome of the games didn't stray far from what happened on the cartoon. But as for Gary Gygax and John Redbridge, their adventures were closer to traditional D&D, with the major exception being that they were from Earth. So in our version, Gary, as a bard, did learn how to play various musical instruments. And when he did play, he would play classic rock stuff from the 1970s, which I thought was sort of cool, but it wasn't exactly traditional D&D. Anyways, so Gygax and Redbridge eventually discover Spelljammers. The Spelljammer they started off with looked like a traditional pirate ship, but it could fly from planet to planet. Their party spent quite a bit of time on an asteroid known as the Rock of Brawl. And there's an awesome library here called the Library of the Spheres, where Gary learned of the existence of 2 opposing factions, the Seekers of Truth and their evil archenemies, the Xenos. So the Xenos, among other things, falsify everything for their own agenda. They lie about current events, history, you name it. The Seekers of Truth, on the other hand, try to get to the bottom of things, and they are very interested in knowledge. Gary got caught up in that war, and we ran him a little bit like Ford Prefect from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Except instead of writing for the guide, Gary wrote something called a monster manual. So as John Redbridge would kill things, Gary would record what they learned. And after many, many years of this, they leveled up. And we followed the rules from D&D's Wrath of the Immortals boxed set written by Aaron Alston for TSR in 1992. And as such, John and Gary both became immortals themselves, unlocking a whole slew of new powers and abilities. So, meanwhile, the other party, the one with the kids, at the end of the day, they discover that Venger is actually the son of the immortal known as the Dungeon Master. And they help Venger to become good again. And when their work is finally done, it's Gary Gygax who uses his newfound abilities as an immortal to take them home. And they return to September 17th, 1973, the exact date they'd left Earth. Gary Gygax stays on Earth, where he takes his monster manual and he turns it into a game, which he calls Dungeons and Dragons. And it is first printed in January of 1974. So in the years to come, various characters on Earth K can actually play the D&D role-playing game inside of our game world. But they can also find secret Spelljammer ports on Earth and actually go visit the various D&D worlds that they had read about in the books. But when they do, they often discover that the Xenos are on Earth. And not everything that the heroes read about in books turns out to be the way things really are when they get to the realm of Dungeons and Dragons. That's a story for another day. By the way, when I owned my comic book store, I ordered all of my RPG supplies through Alliance Game Distributors. And right before 9/11, they had a convention for store owners in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And while I was there, I met Gary Gygax. And we spent the whole time talking about my superhero role-playing game. Gary asked me what my character's adjective was, and I had to ask him what he meant. He said, all great superheroes have one. The Incredible Hulk, the Amazing Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. So he asked me what my adjective was, and I told him I didn't have one. So Gary took it on himself to choose one for me. And the word he chose was doughty. In fact, Larry Elmore was there too, and I asked him if I could get a sketch from him of my character, which he did on the back of a poster that they were giving away in the booth across the aisle from where he was sitting. And anyways, Gary took that sketch from me and he wrote on it. And he also said, adventure on. So at any rate, I went home from the convention and I looked in the dictionary to see what doughty meant. And the first dictionary I grabbed didn't even have that word listed. So I owned this huge dictionary that I'd go to when the medium-sized dictionary failed me, but the big one didn't have it in there either. And it wasn't until 2009, when I finally had internet at home, that I was able to find the term in an online search. And sadly, by the way, that was right after Gary had passed away. So the definition of the word seemed to me almost like a gift from beyond the grave. It meant strong, but not only that, it also meant bold, brave, great-hearted, heroic, manly, stout, and valiant. So I think it's an amazing word. And I think it's pretty cool that it was bestowed upon the John Redbridge character by the father of the role-playing game hobby himself. Anyways, so we loved all of this. We hope that you enjoyed hearing about it too. If so, we would greatly appreciate it if you'd be willing to take a quick moment of your time to support the channel by pressing the like button. Check to see if you're still subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave us a comment. It helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm, and we love hearing from you guys. So from all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth. We hope you have a good one, and adventure on, gaudy listeners. Bye.